So this presentation is going to be a little bit different than last year's. Last year's was a lot more flashy. Last year's I made the bold mistake, or whatever you want to call it, of having no slides and having the entire thing programmed in LabVIEW. This time it's going to be a little more traditional. I have some slides and then I have a demo. And this is all about dotting your I's and crossing your T's in your UI. So it's all of the nitpicky things that you need to do to polish up your UI. And so first off, to introduce myself, not that I need to introduce myself again, but here I am again. One of the things that you might not know is I'm the creator of the Q Control Toolkit, which is why I guess I'm so interested in UIs. I'm also Chief LabVIEW Architect at Tesseract. I'm a board member of G Central, which you heard yesterday. I'm also on the board for the GLA Summit. And I'm admin of the LabVIEW Wiki. And then just to let you guys, if you want to, you can follow me for all my Harry Potter adventures on Instagram. I also have my regular Instagram, which I post less on, and then my LinkedIn and stuff. Before I move on, though, I want to show this, if it will. It's gonna come up on the other screen, though. So let's see. There we go. So this is the famous Weasley cock that I've been talking about. So right now on the hour, it's supposed to be playing, but that's okay. It's sounds probably turned off. It's playing the Harry Potter theme song. It's lit up. The second hand's a golden snitch, so it was flying around all crazy on the hour, but now it's gone back to being seconds. And then I have a hand for each member of my family. So I'm Ravenclaw, my wife's Hufflepuff, my youngest daughter is Slytherin, my oldest daughter is Gryffindor. And so this works by our phone's geolocation and geofencing and updates accordingly. So kind of fun. And that was a fun project done with LabVIEW 2020 on a Raspberry Pi. I have a presentation out there on the internet about it that you can find through the LabVIEW Wiki. So, okay, so dotting the I's and crossing the T's usually refers to all of those things that you need to do, those fine details that you need to do, and usually are the things that you wait till the end to do, not that you need to wait till the end to do them. And so I have 4 rules for a polished UI. Prevent instead of warn, filter features, simplify navigation, and make UIs intuitive. And so in order to help you remember these, here's a nice acronym, PFSM. I guess because we're in Colorado, you know, you can say that it means puff some. Okay, maybe not. So let's just move on from there. Let's see. Okay, prevent instead of warn. So one thing that I dislike as a user of computer programs is to be warned after the fact when I did something wrong, rather than being prevented from doing it wrong in the first place. You know, how many of you had this situation where you're filling out a form and you hit OK and a pop-up happens? Isn't that pretty annoying? It breaks the flow of what you're trying to do, you know, and then you might fill out what you think you need to fill out, hit OK again, and another pop-up happens. It says you filled out the date wrong, and then you fix that. Then you hit it out again, and it says, okay, you got the wrong test station. You know, just really annoying to have that happen. So what I recommend is first, indicate what's required. Make some kind of visual indication. On this one, I have, let's see, I'm going to turn on the laser pointer. There we go. I have the little asterisks here saying these are the required fields. I have something indicating here, okay, that's what that means, the asterisk. The test description is not required in this case. And then in this form, I purposely have grayed out the OK button until you fill in everything that's needed, although I guess in this case it is filled out. It should have been, you know, enabled at that point. Use captions for stuff like this so you don't messy your block diagram by having extra information here. You could also provide extra information, like you could put date and then in parentheses say what you needed to have the date be, but really you could just fill out, make the date control, the date timestamp control, be the form that you want it to be. So entering numerics. First off, if you pick the right representation, then that's half the battle, because if you pick, a U32, then limits out negative numbers. Make sure to set the limits and set it to coerce so that the user is forced to keep it within the limits that you need the number to be. Set the display format up so that the user knows how they're supposed to enter the number. Are they supposed to enter hex? Are they supposed to enter it as decimal? Are they supposed to enter it as binary? If you set up the display entry, then that helps the user understand what you're asking for. So why would you want that? What could go wrong? Well, it depends on your application, but probably a host of things could go wrong with that. Set something out of limits and you have motion control that goes haywire, or you have test limits that are wrong, or anything like that. You want to make sure that the user is forced to give you the right information. Entering strings. If you have a small string, you want to limit to a single line. Can you tell what's entered in this string? No, you can tell that there is a carriage return because LabVIEW now has this nice visual indicator. Before they added that, you would not just think the string was empty. You wouldn't know. But in fact, there is something in here. It's even more problems, more of a problem with the carriage return on the other side, because then they think they filled it out, but there's that extra white space carriage return there. And I know that some people talked about white space sometimes throwing things off in your program, and that's one way to limit that, is to limit to single line. Another thing is to sanitize your inputs. Now, some of this is hard to do before, to do the warn before, or prevent them from doing it rather than having to warn. Sometimes you're going to have to warn them after the fact, because you're going to have to, see if there's any command words or anything like that for SQL or illegal keywords. But here's one way that you can basically prevent it ahead of time, is to use the key down event. You could do this with update while typing, but the key down event will actually give you the keys. And you can see here in this example, I have it limited to only letters and numbers could be entered. If they press anything else, it's just not going to print. Now, a better indicator of this would be like in some applications or some websites, when you're typing in your password, or let's say you're setting a password. They give you some indicator saying, okay, yeah, you've got the special character, you've got the number. They give you the checklist. That's a really good indication of a way to prevent instead of warn. Another thing is, if they do type an illegal character that you don't want, that immediately tells them, hey, that character's not allowed, things like that. Another way to catch these is these two in the comparison palette. Let you know if it's a printable character, so if they can't enter white space, that's one way to catch that. Or this one you might not have used before. This gives you a number depending on what lexical class the character was. If it's a capital letter, a lowercase letter, a white space, a character, they all have a different number associated with them. Just check the LabVIEW help. I always forget what the numbers are. I always have to refer to the help every time I use it, but then you can use that. So why would you need to do this? I'll just give you a second. I know most of you are familiar with this cartoon. So Little Bobby Tables has this very unusual real name right here, but because the school didn't sanitize their input, that injected an SQL statement to delete the table. So that's why you want to do this stuff, is to make sure that things don't happen that you don't intend. File browsing is another one. You know, setting up your file to make the user make sure that they have to select if it's an existing file or a new file. Do you want them to be restricted to a certain extension? Make sure to set up the pattern for the selection. If you want them to start or have a set path that they start in, you know, like you have a special folder where you're going to save the data, make sure to have that be the starting path for the data. If you want to give them special instructions, you can actually set the prompt. That's the part that would appear at the top of the file selection dialog that it pops up. Or if you need to let them know, are they saving? Are they opening a file? Are they selecting a file? What are they doing? You can actually change the button text that appears in that dialog box too. All right, filtering features. This is where you don't want the user to do something that they could normally do, but you can filter those things out. And the first way to do that is filter events. For example, right clicks. If you don't want the user to right click, you can filter the mouse down events and then just look for, you know, one is your primary button, and two is your secondary button, which is usually left click and right click, unless you're a lefty, then it's swapped. But this is important, especially in, I had to do this especially when dealing with a touchscreen, because right clicks are weird on touchscreens, because they basically are long holds. And ends up being interpreted as a right click. And so if the user is, you know, holding down for slightly too long, when they meant to do a left click, they'll do a right click. And so, you know, in our application, we could prevent that. And actually, we did this a little bit different in that particular application, because in this little, where the discard is, you can open that up, and you could actually change what button was clicked. And so if a 2 came out, we could say, no, we actually want to pretend that they actually just did a left click too. So even if they were on a touch screen, you could change what button they clicked. And then after that, the order of events, of how events fire, is after this mouse down filter event. If you don't discard it, the next event that will fire is, you know, the regular mouse down and then the value change. And so if you needed to have all of those events, they would fire in that order if this were to happen. Another thing to prevent that is helpful is if you use like subpanels or something like that, you can just disable the right click on the subpanel or disable any clicks on the subpanel, and then they won't be able to click anything that is inside of that subpanel. It won't pass the event down to what's running in the subpanel. Other filter events that exist, like I showed you the key press one, there's lots of other filter events. Basically a filter event, if you're looking in the event window and you're choosing the event, it's anything with the question mark after it. It will give you basically this output where you can change certain things about what was clicked or hit or whatever. All right, how many have, I couldn't find a really good LabVIEW example of this, but how many have seen UIs that are just overloaded? Yeah. And so one thing that I want to say is only show relevant controls and data at any given time. So there's a number of ways to do this. You can change the visibility of controls and indicators. That works to a certain extent, but if you have a whole bunch of controls and indicators, you probably want to start to compartmentalize those so you don't have all of that code in one gigantic VI. And some of the ways to do that is pop-outs. Pop-out is really just a special dialog almost, another VI that pops up. And I'll show you an example of that when we get to the demo. There's pop-outs. Those are really just moving the splitter, so they're still part of the VI. You can use tab controls The tab control pages, though, are hard to resize. And when I get to the resizing part of this presentation, I'll show that. So there's other things you can do besides use tab controls. And that goes to the next part, which is the subpanels. One thing that I use extensively and I really like is MGI's Panel Manager for managing subpanels. Toggling scroll bar visibility. Now you could leave the scroll bar on a string or on a list box or whatever on all the time if you want, but it's a very good visual indication that there's more data there. And so like in this example, this string only has 2 lines, and so I purposely hide that scroll bar. This one, you can tell there's multiple lines because the scroll bar pops up and you can actually then use it to scroll the string. And so the way to kind of control this for strings is there's actually a text document width and a text document height. And even though those are string, or those are scripting nodes, so you have to have scripting turned on to see them, it is available in the runtime engine. So this is one of those things that you can still use in an executable and it will still be fine as far as the scripting node is concerned. The reason why I have the case structure here is I found out that if enable strings is true, then you can't turn on the horizontal scroll bar. It will give you an error. So just so you know, that's why I have that there. The other case is if it's true, then it only sets the vertical. It doesn't set the visibility of the horizontal. For list boxes, multi-column list boxes, tables, trees, there's a slightly different way to do it. I don't have it included here, but you would have to basically know how many rows you have and have the height of each row to know how much data is there, and then figure out, okay, does that go bigger than the actual control is, and do it that way. Okay, splitter bars. So I'm going to talk about splitter bars more when we get to the resizing, but if you don't want them to be able to move the stuff, make sure you lock the splitter bars, because it gets really weird. Like if they think it's a toolbar and they accidentally drag it down, and now there's all this blank space, and it might confuse your user. Places where you want to lock is like toolbars, status bars, that would be like at the top and the bottom. Places where you want it to be movable is like if you have 2 strings or 2 tables or 2 charts, and you want to be able to let the user be able to move and have one be smaller and one be larger, then you want to make some indication that they can move it. All right, simplifying navigation. So this idea is you want to make it easy to get to stuff. Reducing clicks, making sure things are navigable, take into account, what is the input device that's going to be used. Is the user going to want to be able to, rather than have to move the mouse around, do they want to just hit arrow keys to move up and down, or tab keys? So the first part of that is the set the tab order. So this is something that you can do from the edit menu, set tab order, and then it shows up almost like when you're trying to order something in a cluster, and then you can click and say, okay, I want it to appear in this order. Oftentimes there's reasons to have it skip something like an indicator. You don't want it to come to the tab when you're tabbing and have it, select an indicator. Then you can set this on individual controls. You can right click and go to the key navigation page in the properties and set to skip that control. One weird thing though is when you're doing tab order and tab controls, if you have stuff in clusters, then it will just go to the cluster, and then it will go past the cluster to the next item. To be able to enter a cluster, you have to do control down to enter it, or control up to exit it. I think that there is an LabVIEW idea exchange out there that it talks about the tab order should ignore clusters and should just tab through like the cluster wasn't even there. That's one option. Another option is maybe you shouldn't use clusters in your front panel. You know, use that as a data structure, not as a UI element. I mean, there's other ways to block things. You can use decorations and other things to kind of group a set of items as a block visually without using a cluster to do it. Any questions so far? I'm kind of going fast, so.
No, it's just in direct response to what you were saying with for using design instead of a cluster for blocking things out. That the one place where that really bit me was when screen sizes change. So if you're using the same app across different computers, my boxes or my lines end up getting distorted across different screen sizes. Is there any changes?
I guess I'm not understanding the question yet.
Like if I have a group of buttons and I put a box design around it, or if I put a bar there, it might shift if I have a different screen size that it goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, decorations are hard to deal with as far as resizing is concerned. I have a set of rules that I'll be showing you later about what's resizable and what's not. And I would try to put that into a section of your screen that's not going to resize. That is another LabVIEW idea exchange thing, is to make getting references to decorations easier so you can programmatically handle resizing if you needed to. Right now, the way that you can get references to decorations, it basically comes up into an array, and it's an array of Z order. And so it makes it really hard to find out, because your Z order is basically the order that you placed them down, unless you go change the order, you know, with the toolbar. So it's really hard to go find, okay, which one is that particular decoration. A way to get those references easier would be nice. Any other questions? There's another one back.
Way back on numeric entry, you mentioned coercing the value to the limits. Does that lead to users not realizing that it got coerced and saying, oh, I wanted a 12, or I thought I was put a 12 in there, but it got pulled back to a 10, and can you warn the user about that?
If you have coerce set, then as soon as they enter the number, it's going to coerce right then to the number. So back on coerce, we'll back up to it. One more, there we go. So back on coerce, right here is where you're setting that. And so if you have like the lower limit set, if you have somebody enter something lower than that limit, it's automatically going to coerce and snap to that on the screen, right after they click off of it, right after the value change event, basically. Now, maybe one of the LabVIEW guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it actually happens before the value change, because the value change event will show you the coerce number. Is that correct? Okay. So they're going to not be able to enter a number that's wrong. And they'll have a visual indication that, oh, it didn't accept that number, it went to whatever the minimum was. Another good indicator, though, is use captions, put in parentheses what the limits are. You know, say, enter, you have a field that says enter a number, and then you have, 4 through 8 or something, whatever the range is supposed to be, then it will let the user know a little bit easier. Another thing is the increment. Basically, you're setting the decimal place that they're allowed, if this is a double. So if you say they can only enter it to the 0.5, then also it's going to round you'll have to go look up LabVIEW's rounding scheme, because I know it's using IEEE or something. But then it will automatically snap to whatever it rounds to. So there'll be a visual indicator for the user. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yep.
I have some control systems where you can manually enter numbers, but another program can take control of that control system and put in numbers. And the problem is, if you put this coercion stuff, or this stuff that you're showing right now, the user can put in, is coerced into correct numbers, but the system that's controlling it in some cases, it doesn't know anything about this. And so I deal with that by putting the coercion part further in just before it uses that number, and then writing the control back out correctly so the user sees the actual number.
Okay, that's a way you might have to do it in that case. If there's something else setting it, you're going to have some other check.
There is an idea called domain-driven design, and I highly recommend people go look into it. And it has this idea of domain primitives, where it's basically, if you had some value in your program that could only be between 0 and 5, you would create a class that ensures that that value is always between 0 and 5, no matter where it came from. So that's worth looking into.
All right. Anything else? We'll zoom back to where we were. Let's see. I've been up here too much, and my voice is already dying. I'm sorry to actually have to bug you again with my presence, but okay, key focus is the next one. I have often found when I'm using someone's program and it goes into a dialog box, and it's got, especially if it's like one string entry, it doesn't select that string. I have to go click on it. There's some dialogues in the VI package manager that I wish they would fix that on, because it's kind of annoying when you're trying to type things in. I mean, it only saves the user one click, but it also draws their attention to what they need to focus on and where they need to start entering information. So I do this for dialogues and form entries. You know, I'll have it, when it first pops up, it will select the first, field or string or whatever. Setting up key navigation. When you're setting up menus, you can set control keys. It's right in the menu editor right here. You can decide how you want to do that. For dialogues, there's actually a property that you can set. Excuse me. There's a property you can set in a VI, in the VI properties, to say that you want the default button to be the enter key. You can also do it through the key navigation tab again. So when you right click and go to the properties of the control, you can select the key navigation for that, for either focus or toggle. So for dialog boxes and stuff, I will always try to set the default button, whether the default's going to be okay or the default's going to be cancel, depends on the situation. I'll have that be the enter key, just so that the user doesn't have to, if they're working on the keyboard, they don't have to go to the mouse and track over to the OK button, especially if it's like it is a pop-up warning. Sometimes you still need them. Then it will automatically allow you to dismiss the dialog. There's one time I ran into that you don't want to do that. If you have a multi-line string in a form and you hit enter, it's going to toggle the button too. So you don't want to then set it in a form that has that ability. So just keep that in mind. And then if you have a toolbar, sometimes it's very nice to have the tools be assigned to keys. Unfortunately, you can't have the same, like hotkeys like you can have in a menu, but for buttons, you can set them to like the F keys and stuff like that, and that would be appropriate in your program. Any other questions? Yep. Brian has a question or comment. Most likely a comment, because he's smarter than I am.
Do you have any advice for barcode-friendly, like entries of serial numbers? Like, do you configure the barcode reader to send a character to inline feed or not send one? And do you always, monitor every key that it enters? How do you do that?
That's a little bit difficult of a situation. I have had a program where I did that, and if you don't have the field highlighted and you go try to scan it, then it's not going to necessarily go in there. I think I got around it where I had like something watch for a key press and save the first key press, because that gets lost in, in my situation, I had a screensaver. And so I had to watch and save the first keys, because that would be the key that got lost waking up the screensaver. I didn't use the Windows screensaver. I programmed my own kind of makeshift screensaver so I could do that. As far as like termination, I think I always have the termination, because then I could see that the barcode was done and then, cause the value change to happen at that point. I think I turned on the update while typing so that I could see that, though, so that I could see all the characters coming in and then watch for that. Does anybody have any other way that they might have? Okay, or another question?
Yeah, just want to talk about the default that you turn on your key navigation. Sometimes it might be easier, as you say, to go to the normal default, but sometimes the mentality of somebody is just if you change, let's say the normal thing is always okay, but then if you go and put it somewhere else, they might accidentally go. So I look for more of a standardization of always going to let's say, even though they might have to change it, what are your thoughts on that?
That does make a lot of sense. Like, if the dialog is always okay as the enter key, you might want to keep it that way. The only reason why I say you might want to be careful is if it's a safety concern. If they're just blindly hitting enter and you don't want them to, maybe that's a time to not have the enter key, because it is a safety concern, that they do have to physically go click it or tab to it or something like that rather than enter. Yeah, but I agree with you. Most of the time you probably want to keep it standard on one or the other. It makes sense. Any other comments?
Back to Brian's question about a barcode scanner. The next time you talk to Fabiola, she's got it figured out. She's got a really robust barcode scanner UI, so she can answer any questions you have.
Cool. Okay. Last rule, make the UI intuitive. Now, being too creative is a detriment. If you start hiding things where people aren't used to finding them, then it's not going to make the UI easy. There's lots of examples out there. I mean, look at Windows applications. Someone commented the other day, make the darn X actually exit the program, because people are used to that. Use other iOS web page examples of how navigation happens and things like that, and don't try to just reinvent the wheel just to be creative. One way that you can give more information to the user to make it a little bit more intuitive is to use tip strips. Set up the tip strip to give them more information. One part that this might not work on is if they're in a touch screen, because there isn't any hover when they're using a touch screen. So you're going to have to figure out a different way to use it, or to give them that information. Maybe use captions or other things. In using captions, like I said, you can do like limits or use what the default value is or something like that in the title, but you don't actually use the label, you use the caption, because then it doesn't mess up, doesn't leave big long things on your block diagram for that. So you can see in this example, I use captions to actually have the little asterisk for the required, but this is what my terminals look like, so they don't have the asterisk on it. Now, that's not as big of a deal in that when it's just the asterisk, but if it has lots of other information that you want to convey to your user, then that would be a reason to use that. On iconography, let's use some standard icons, like a gear is to set up as a dialog for settings or other options. A hamburger menu is just a list of navigation items. A different type of menu is called a bento menu, after the Japanese dinner boxes with all the different compartments. That would be like having an icon menu with lots of different sections that they could go to. Filter options, if you want them to be able to filter data or something like that, have the button look like this, because that's what most people are used to. The view or eye, if you want to hide or disable the toggle the view of something, for example, like toggling passwords to show the normal string versus the password string. Another one is all of these, cancel, close, disable, and power, aren't necessarily interchangeable. At least in our coding standard at TestDirect, we've defined them as this is the reason you should use these. Cancel ends an operation. Close is used opposite the OK button in dialog boxes. Disable would be to disable or enable a UI element or a piece of hardware. And then power would be to actually shut down the system. Question? Yep.
All of those buttons that you just showed look way better than the ones that ship with LabVIEW. Where do we get buttons like that?
I'm going to show that, but their DMC is the ones that I'm showing.
So partially in answer to Darren's question, not necessarily the LabVIEW buttons, but the icons themselves can be found, or a good place I've found them is materialdesignicons.com. Is a great way to find icons like what Q's got on the page there. It's a searchable web page. You can download SVGs, you can download PNG copies of these. A lot of them come from Google, who's open sourced their material design icons. And then there's a ton of that just normal users have contributed and applied to a open source license as well. And that's maybe what Q's going to talk about.
You read my mind.
I read your mind, good.
But that's okay. The last part of the iconography is just exactly what you were asking me. These are the DMC ones. I'm showing the DMC palette right here. JKI has a design palette that has some really good ones in it. The Google material icons. There's also something called Font Awesome that people use on a lot of web pages. And I'm sure there's hundreds of other ways to go Google and you can Google for royalty-free icons all over the place. So in my presentation from last year, I also talk about some art programs that are free that you can use to help design your own if you're so inclined. If you're artistic and like to do that, I kind of like to do that. So, okay, a good layout. Here's another reason, another don't reinvent the wheel. If you always have the layout like this, everyone's going to understand what things kind of do. Having the title bar, the menu bar, the toolbar, then the main application area where everything happens, and then the status bar is at the bottom. Or conversely, you could have a tool menu area toward the left-hand side. By doing that, that's kind of universal. Everybody kind of understands that layout. Resizability, using splitters. You can see as these fade out that I actually have splitters in these areas, but you don't necessarily see them. One reason why you don't see them is I like to use the classic style and then color them the same as the background so you don't see them, especially if they're locked. You don't want them to necessarily know that they're there. You can usually set them by just dragging them to 2 pixels, but like Enrique brought up, Hope Harrison's Pain Relief, it lets you do a lot of fancy things, and it'll let you set your splitters all the way down to 0. Keep in mind though, if you set them down to 0, you can no longer grab them at all. So you have to use Pain Relief in order to get them back so that you can actually grab them. Some other things is make sure to turn off all of the scroll bars on all of your panes. You don't need them. You're going to make things all resizable. As you're using splitters, set the size based off of the use of the pane, like sticks to the top, sticks to the left, things like that. You can see from my small one to my large one, I had it so that these didn't resize, but this guy is set to resize, and so he's set to size with the pane. As you define your splitters and you define which ones can grow and how the splitters stick, it's going to define some panes as resizable and some panes aren't resizable. Or some panes will only resize in one direction, either horizontal or vertical. So in general, you want to put 1 control per pane and set that control to resize with the pane. In some instances, like groups of buttons and things like that, okay, that's going to become a pane that's not resizable. Some other tricks are setting where the origin sticks. So normally I keep all of my origins in the top left of every pane, but in this one, I've changed the origin to stick to the right, and then I actually have my button to the left of the origin. What that does is you can see that with that splitter being between those two buttons, and setting that splitter to be proportionally resizable, it actually made it stay centered. Those two buttons stayed centered. So here's my example of elements that are resizable. In the horizontal, there's strings, numerics, paths, enums, etc. Large strings can be resizable in both. Tables and list boxes and all of those, charts, etc. are resizable in both directions. Items that are not resizable or not easy to resize are buttons, tab controls, strings and everything else, especially if they're in groups. If you're not going to separate them into their own panes, there might be reason to just leave a group of strings set to a size and not change them. So some exceptions. If you're going to do a pop-out, like I'm going to show you in just a moment, if you set, like this is a list box right here, if you set that to resize with the pane and you want to collapse this all the way down, you'll get an error. You'll get this error right here saying that you're setting it smaller than you can. So in that case, you can't just have it be that way. You have to handle the resizing programmatically. All right, so bringing it all together. The pirate code says that these are more what you call guidelines than actual rules. So you guys have to just kind of figure out what makes sense. Let me show you my demo and then we'll wrap up. So in this demo, I wanted to use as little programming as possible. So there's not a lot of resizing programming or anything behind this. The only part that has resizing programming is this guy, like I said, because of wanting to be able to collapse this. So here's an example of a pop-out where I pop that out and then I have a menu, I can pop it back in and it disappears. An example of a pop-up would be like the status bar. If you want to be able to have extra status, if you click on this, I have a pop-up, it comes up, it would list, time and day and stuff of the history of the statuses. This is a VI that using Panel Manager, you can actually set where you want it to pop up. So I told it I wanted it to pop up above offset from this control and have it pop up there. I also have something watching that if I click off of it, it automatically dismisses it. Rather than having to do the X, I still have the X there, but to dismiss it as well. But that one is a dismissible, by clicking off of it, essentially. Another example is like the settings, having a dialog box. I have everything resizable here except for those buttons. There's no programming for resizing behind any of this. It's all the splitters and how the splitters are set up. Using JKI's trick, I also have it movable using this as the title bar. On that note, on this, if I type some things in here, those were the required fields, so now the required fields are in, and now the OK button is available. On here, when I go to tab control, you can see the tab control itself is resizable, but everything in it doesn't resize. If you wanted it to be resizable, you'd have to handle that all programmatically, and that's a pain. You can see in this one too, on page 2. So here's an example of using subpanels. I'm using the tab control is really just hidden in its own pane, and all I'm showing is the tabs. And it's actually just being used as navigation to say what VI do I want to show in the subpanel. So now I have page 1, which is really its own VI in the subpanel, showing up. And when I click on page 2, then it just switches which is being displayed. And then I can make all of those resizable. Norm?
With the resizing, there's the option for change the size of things while the pane resizes so that it's constantly updating. Have you found that's a bad thing or a good thing, or notice you're not using it?
I'm not sure I know of it. What is?
So like as you are changing it, the things aren't changing size. There's an option to change the object sizes while it's resizing. Sometimes things like that can be quirky, and you may have got enough experience to say why not to. So
I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I would say if there's a lot going on your front panel, then you probably don't want it to update live. You probably want to wait till they let go of the mouse and then it redraws. On an example as simple as this, I probably could have done what you said. That would make sense. So that's my little resizable demo. Like I said, there's hardly any actual programming behind this. It's all done with the splitters mostly, except for like the navigation, or this and the navigation between the subpanels, which is handled through Panel Manager. All of this is very similar to what TestDirect has for task, and it's using the actor framework really under the hood here for doing that. So, okay, last couple slides. Zip down. So really, the last slides is, why do you do this? Well, it really depends. I know this is nitpicky. This all costs extra money to try to do all these nitpicky things. It all depends on the safety and the requirements of your customer. But if you really want something to be polished, you want to be able to have this set up this way so that they're not interacting with it with the way that you don't want them to. Although, like Stephen Hawking says, when you make something idiot-proof, they just make better idiots. So you ultimately need to decide, as the developer, how much of this, take it as, like I said, guidelines, and decide what you need to do from there. So, any questions?
I guess my question for you, Q, is back to the buttons. One of the things that we have found that can be an issue is making these buttons making lots and lots of buttons can take a lot of time. We've actually developed a little tool that will programmatically make them for us by tearing apart a control file and kind of editing it under the scenes and throwing those buttons in there. So I was curious kind of what you guys have done. Do you just standardize so that your buttons, you've made them once, either made them by hand or made them programmatically, or when you find yourself having to make new buttons, do you again do them by hand, or you kind of have a programmatic way that you make them?
Well, most of the time we standardize on the DMC controls, and that covers probably 90% of what we need, maybe even more than that, honestly. Right now, I usually make them by hand. I have some vector drawing tools that I like to use, and I like to do it. But yeah, the tool that you're talking about that you created is similar to what Enrique talked about that Matthias made, and his does the same thing yours is doing under the hood. There's other ways to have a button creator that could help you out. If you're doing a lot of them, then you might want to consider that. So,
yeah, I mentioned the material design icons. We found it's kind of nice. It's a GitHub repo, so we've actually gone and you can download all the SVG files, and we've programmatically made it. It'll make all of those into buttons. Granted, we don't use them very often, but 7,500 LabVIEW buttons is kind of nice to get sometimes. And then I had a quick comment for Norm, because I have done what you were talking about, where I leave mine or have mine resize while it's drawing and resizing while it's being dragged, and I have not found problems with it. I find it works very well, and it looks nice.
Any other questions? Yeah, as far as having a library of buttons, like you said, it would be nice. Some of my wish list for NI for UIs is allow decals to be programmatically changed. Have better support for vector graphics, have a little bit higher resolution, and better resolution in the picture control. I'd love the picture control to have higher resolution, and those are some of my wish lists for UIs. And I think we are done. So thank you very much.
A special thanks goes out to Kevin Chirey, Quentin Q. Alldredge, Mark Balla, and Jeff DeBoer for their help in filming. And of course, this GDevCon NA 2023 wouldn't be possible without all of our sponsors. Thanks!